This is Gemara Metziah, Daf Yomi test. We're holding in the bottom of Yud Chesem and Beis, and one more time, we're holding a few days before the incredible Yom Tov of Purim, Tainis Esther. Wonderful days, Misugal, for all tefillos and bakashais. Let's prepare properly. Firstly, to keep ahead of the daf so that we don't fall behind over Yom Tov, over Purim, Tainis Esther, etc. Secondly, if anyone would like to share the schos of Limud HaTorah. We pick it up in the bottom of Yud Chesed Beis, 4 lines to the bottom, in the middle of discussing when you could return a get even after time elapsed. Rav Yirmiyah said the case could be the Kamri Eidim El Muchasan get Echad. If Eidim testify that they only ever signed on one get. Rav Ashi Amar, 4 lines to the bottom. Kigain, what is the case? The Ka'amar Yaakov Yeshlei Misada is playing this, that there is a hole in the side of the document, and the get has such a hole. So if they give such a defining characteristic to the document, that's going to be the case that there will be a namanis, particularly for this document, even though it was lost some time prior. Says the Gemara, V'davka b'tzada is plainis, and particularly if it was on one side, a hole, avol nekev ba'al maloi, but stam a hole would not be enough. Says the Gemara, why Rav Ashi misafkler? Rav Ashi is unsure whether simanim, whether having a stam simin idaraisa, either abanan, whether it would be a din daraisa or a din dirabanan. As Rashi points out, this is a sugya about an aveda, lost item, whether it be daraisa dirabanan. And therefore, if afilu beisa daraisa, we could be able to be saimich. Or maybe it's only a din dirabanan on hefker bezer that works on monetary matters, but not on isurim. But therefore, only if it's going to be a siman muvak, that's the times that will be saimich on, and that's usually where Rashi says it has to be nekev yishlai b'tzad ois ploinis. Says the Gemara, Rabba Bar Barachana. Rabbi Barachana was acting as a shliach to deliver a get. As we move over to today's daf of Yutesam and Aleph, Irchas Le Gita. And what happens is Rabbi Barachana is bringing a get. He obviously stops off to learn in Beis Medrash, and Irchas Le Gita, he loses the get b'bei midrasha in the Beis Medrash. Amar, Rabbi Rachana says to the Talmidim that found the get, and the top Rashi over here fills in the details like we just said. Isamana isli b'gavei, itviyaseina isli b'gavei. So said Rabbi Rachana, whatever you want, I have in order to prove that this get is the one that I'm giving. You want a simin? I have a simin. Itviyaseina, you want to know if I recognize the item? That as well I have. So what happened? They returned it to him. Amar. Afterwards, Rabbi Chana remarked, Lo yadana, I'm not sure why did they give it to me. Imisham simana hadrunani, because Savri simanim daraisa. Did they return it to me because I told them I have a siman and the old simanim are daraisa? Imisham tviyas eina hadrunani alei, or because of tviyas eina. V'davkot sorba me'rabanan, and tviyas eina, which is that you can recognize the item not necessarily because there is one particular siman, because you know what the item is, and therefore he was unsure. Was it only because he was a sorba me'rabanan aval inish al malai, but on a regular person he would not necessarily be able to give it back? So Rabbi Chana says he's not sure why they gave it to him. So says the Gemara Kufa, let's take a little bit of a deeper dive into the aforementioned Brisa. That was the Brisa that we quoted yesterday. So says the Gemara, Bizman, when Shabal Moidem Yachzir Leisha, when the Baal is mighty, you return to the woman. Asks the Gemara, it's very nice that the Baal admits that he divorced his wife, but how do we know that it happened on the time of the date based on the concerns that we brought up in the previous dafin? That there are times that one might write a get, one might write a shtar and not act on it until a later date. Says the Gemara, maybe that's the case over here. Shamakasav litem benisav lanasla tishrei. And then what happens is the husband selling the payros in those interim months. And what's going to happen because of a Nisan? And therefore she, because of a Nisan, she has this get that's written when? Back in Nisan. Again, the get says Nisan. Let's just think Pesach. But maybe they didn't actually get divorced until Tishrei, Rosh Hashanah time, 6 months later. And what's going on? In those 6 months, the husband sold properties, but his wife wasn't divorced. But she has a paper saying she was divorced back from Nisan. And what's going to happen? And therefore, maybe she's going to go and she could collect for these properties illegally. So ask the Gemara, very good that the husband admits, but how can you return the get? Explains the Gemara, it makes sense. According to Mandamar, that says that from the moment that a husband decides to divorce his wife, even before he actually gives his get, Shavein lebal peiros, the husband no longer has peiros in her property, shapir, then everything is good. Why? Because then even if he sold the properties between Nisan and Tishrei, it is indeed hers. But according to the opinion that says Yesh lebal peiros achas nesina, but according to the opinion that says that the husband retains the peiros achas nesina until he actually divorces his wife, Michael and Meimar, what are we going to say? Maybe he sold these properties in these 6 months, sold the payros, therefore she is going to illegally collect. Answers the Gemara, Ki asya lemitraf, when she comes to collect, Amrinan law, we tell her, I see raya, emas mata gita liyadach. Very good, you have a get that has a date in it, but we enforce her. Or we force her, or if she wants to collect, she has to do what? Bring proof when you actually got the divorce, when this document came to your hands. Says the Gemara, why is this different than a regular document of a loan? If there's a chayis in the shtar, lo yachzir, we don't return evo kimna. And we said, when is this case you don't return it? Even when even when the one that is obligated admits that he owes the money. Why do we not return it? For our concern. Because maybe the date in the document is prior to the actual halva. And what's going to happen? So ask the Gemara, why in that case do we clearly not return the document? But we're saying in our case we would. Hasam Nami, in that case as well, the Hader, we should return it and when the one comes to collect. Will tell him, bring your proof when it came to your hands. And we say we don't do that. So why by get Isha are we saying you could? Amri answers the Gemara, Hacha gabe get Isha asi lekeach vitava. Here in the case of the get Isha, the person who bought the property will come and demand that she proves when she got divorced. Amar, why will the loikeach demand such proof? Because he's going to say, Haida hadruani Allah, Rabbana ligita misham deloy ta'agin v'teisif. That the reason, he's going to reason with himself, and he's going to say, wait, why did they give her this get? You know why? So that lo ta'agin v'teisiv, she doesn't remain an haguna. However, hashta de ka'asya lemitra, but now that she wants to collect these properties from me, let her bring a proof when the get came to her hands. Meaning the purchaser on his own is going to realize that, wait, maybe the only reason they gave it to her is something to do with the get. So he's going to demand proof. Vitava. But Ishtar Chayiv, there's no reason for him to be Teveya. Why? Because he thinks, since Chazal allowed him to get back this document, Pshita, it's Pashit, that whatever date in the document is real. Because why else did they return it for him? If not, L'mitrafu, to collect with it. So from the fact that he must be that he is able to collect from the date. He's not going to ask for proof when he bought, when the halva happened. So Shema Mina Kamu Rabbanan b'Milsei Makvi Didi Matashar Liyadei. So says the Gemara, from here we have a proof. Meaning, he said, Shema Mina, Kam Rabbanan Milsei, must be they believed in Umakar Didi Matashtar Liyadei. And in truth, he had it before I purchased the land. So says the Gemara, there's a fundamental difference between get and a regular case of halva. By get, the purchaser, again, what's the case? Man, we'll call him husband, divorced his wife in September. The concern is, what about all the properties he sold since June, that he sold since May? So says the Gemara, you know what's going to happen? She now has her get, she wants to collect it, so she goes to some guy who brought a piece of property in August. He says, you owe me. Why? Look, here's a get star. Here's my get that I got divorced back in June. But we know it's not true. She didn't really get divorced till September. They just wrote the date earlier. So, but the purchaser on his own is going to think, wait, why did Chazal return this document or the get? Maybe not because they really believe the veracity, or they really believe everything's good about this document, but they don't want her to be an aguna. So on his own, the purchaser is going to ask for proof when she actually got divorced, and therefore will never come to any issues. Whereas in a regular case of Shtar Chayiv, the person thinks that there's no reason for him to ask for such proof, because if they return the document, clearly they verified it prior. And we continue about 15 lines to the white lines. The two dots quotes the Gemara, the Mishnah, Shechuri Avadim, Vechulu, that these are more items that are found in the Mishnah discuss when they're allowed to be returned. Tana Rabbanan, says the Gemara, if someone finds a document that says an Eved, a slave, is freed in the market, if the master is Maid, then indeed free the Eved, Yachsar Eved, return to the Eved. If the master does not admit, Lo Yasar Lo Zev Lo Lezeh. Says the Gemara, 1 second. Why Vamai? Maybe he didn't really divorce the Eved until many months later. And what's the problem? And the Eved went and he bought properties from Nisa Tishrei. And then the master went and he sold those properties that the Eved acquired, because we know whatever the Eved acquires goes to the master. And then what's going to happen? The Eved's going to pull out a document that's written earlier, and he's going to say, hey, you bought that property from my master. Guess what? It really was mine. And I was no longer an Eved, so give it back to me. So what's going to happen? Who's going to lose over here? We have to be afraid that the Lukuchais are going to lose. Says the Gemara, Ha nichleman damers chasu levet shezim dachaziyad rabbi lecheros ucheabayo damer eida v'chasu min zachem leishapir. According to the opinion that says it's chos, it's good for the Eved to leave his master, and like Abaya says that by their signatures, everything is kaina, then shapir, then it's good if you return it to the Eved. Why? Because whenever the document is written, that's when it is chal. And therefore, if it was written back in Nisan, that's when it was signed, then that's when the Eved has rights to the properties. But asks the Gemara Laman Damar in the last narrow line, what are you going to tell me? On the first white line, they're going to tell him. Answers the Gemara, you know why it's not a concern, because when he comes to collect, they're going to tell him, just like we said by the Get Isha, they're going to require him to bring proof exactly when he got freed, and therefore we do not have to be concerned. And on the second white line, we quote the next case of the Mishnah, Daitiki Matana. The Mishnah said, Daitiki are documents, wills on one's deathbed. Matana, gift documents, etc. Tana Rabbana Yizehu Daitiki. What is the Daitiki? Says the Gemara, it's a contraction of dot to hey lemekam v'liyois. This should be to endure and be. That what? Shemeis the chasal leploni. Shemeis that if this guy dies, the chasal leploni, his properties go to ploni. Matana, what does that refer to? Go shikasaba me'ayoim ulachar misa. Says the Gemara, Alma, what do we see? Iksiva me'ayoim ulachar misa hu dekani. That's when there's a kinyan. V'iloi loikani. If not, there will be no kinyan. Says the Gemara, is that true? The only time a matana is going to work if you write me'ayoim lachamisa. Amar Abaye achi kamer. This is what's going on. Ezehi matana bari shehi kim matana shchimara. What is the matana of a healthy person that has the same status as a matana of one on his deathbed? Deloi kani el lachamisa. That what? That just like the shchimara, that there's no kinyan until after he dies. So how can you have a regular document of a healthy person that has the same mechanics? On that, says the Gemara, seemingly the reason is to know. What is the reason that we don't return these documents? The Daitiki, the Matana, the reason is because the Lamar to know, he didn't say give it to the person that he gave the Matana to. It seemingly indicates on the two lines from the bottom, Amar to know, nice him. Let's say Reuven admits, yes, I gave this Matana to Shimon. So it sounds like we would give back the document to Shimon. V'reminu asked the Gemara, Matzah daitakois apoitki yoisu matanois. Says the Vraisa, if someone finds you sick bed wills, which are documents that say where someone can collect from. Says the Bryce, you don't return it to anyone. As we turn over to Yetesa Midbeis. Why not? Habibari, Habishchimara. Says the Gemara, if we're talking about a bari, then the document is not returned. If we're talking about a shchimara, that's when the document would yes be returned. But asks the Gemara continues explaining the Gemara in the top line of your Testament base. Masnis, and when it comes to our Mishnah, Tani Amar Tanu Naistim. The Mishnah said that if he says Tanu, meaning the Mishnah was Medayik, it didn't say. But the implication of the Mishnah is that if he said Tanu, we would yes give it back. It's Bishchimara. Tavayim. Bishchimara. Dvar Mahaderhu. Cause there is a way that you could be chayzer because it was only written whilst he was a mishchimara, but it won't be able to allow him to collect illegally. Says the Gemara, how can one retract in the case of a shchimara? Damrinan, because we say Michael Meimar. We say what could be done with such a document? Dilma kasva meikara lahai ve'imlach lo yavani alei. Maybe he wrote it to one person, he didn't give it to him. Other kasva in shachrin, he wrote it to another person v'yavani alei, and he gave it to him. But says the Gemara, if that is true, that only maybe now he's backing out, and that's the reason why he wants to return it, and that's why we're not going to listen to him. Says the Gemara, if he gave it to the person as a regular matan of a healthy person, less leipseida, then there's no loss. Why? Because when both documents come to Bezdin, Besraisa, Zachi, the latter document is one that's going to win. Why? Because we're going to say the other baby Kamaisa that he was chayzer from the earlier one. Says the Gemara, but if the matnas shchimra, we should also return it. Why should we also return it? Says the Gemara, because less meipseida, there's no problem. Because the Braisa Zachi, the Basraisa Zachi, to Kahader Be Mika Maisa, because he's chayzer from the earlier one. So says the Gemara, what's going on over here is as follows. When the Braisa said, even though they are both maideh, that's referring to Bibari. Why? because you can't back out. Tu Damrina, and that's what we say. Dilma Kasva Lahai Meikara. Maybe he wrote it to Reuven. Vem Lachani changed his mind. He didn't give it to him. Father Kasva Nishachrina V'Avilei, and Hashtakader Be'Mahu Diavilei. V'Savar, and he thinks Mahader Lo Motzina Adrina. I can't back out to be Emerlud Analai of Yahavta. I'm going to say I'm giving you to this guy, and thereby back out. V'Nehadrinu V'Nehadrinu Kasva Ki Heichi T'Chima V'Gai Kasva. They called him, and therefore he'll have an earlier document. And Zachabehu. But what does Bezdin say? El Amrina. And with this we conclude this part of the Gemara. Says the Gemara, El Amrina le. We tell him. Bezdin says, Anan haikasva lo yavina le. We're not going to give it back to this person that you say it was his. Why? Maybe you wrote it. You never gave it to him. And rather, you give someone else. Now you want to be chayzer. So if you did not give it to someone else, the kabas and you still want to give it to this person, so kasav le'ashta. So we tell him, go write a document now, ksava achrin, another document. And you'll be able to give it to him. Last babe Seda. Why? They called him Zachi, because he'll have an earlier shtar. Says the Gemara, and that's how we're going to reconcile the Mishnah and the Brisa, that the Mishnah is talking about a Manas Chimera, whereas the Brisa is talking about a Manas Bari, and because of that, that's where the different dinim is going to stem from. But says the Gemara, 1 second, 13 lines from the wide lines. First word on the line is Pseida. Maskiv la Rav Zvid. Yes, Rav Zvid, you're being mechalek between the Brisa, between the Mishnah, Manas Bari, Manas Chimera. As Rav Zvid, I don't understand. Both the Brisa and the Mishnah say explicitly that we're talking about Taitakais. We're talking about sick bed wills. And yet, the Mishnah says that we're going to return the document, and the Brisa says we don't. Very nice, you're trying to be machalik in cases, but they're very explicit that they're both talking about Taitakis. Elam Ravzviz, the new pshat. Hava b'shchimera, v'loy kasha. Habei, v'habibrei. One is the Mishnah is talking about where he gives it to him himself. V'habibrei, whereas the Brisa is talking about we don't return it, refers to his son. Says the Gemara, why? Masni, son the Kamar to know. He says, give it back nice and b'didei. Why? Devar Mahadar. Who? Because we don't have to be worried because he always could be chayzer. Damrina, and why? Because we say, Nami Avalin Shachrina, less leib Seida. Again, why is there no Pseida? They kamo basar zachi. An earlier date and a later date. Basar zachi, later date will win. And therefore the one that really got it is the one that's going to end up with the property. The other be'mi gamak, he was chayzer kikatani. The Brisa. And yeah, when the Brisa said is bibari. So Rav Zvid has a different chilik, not between a daitaki and not, but rather they're both talking about a shchimera. Whereas the Mishnah was talking about Bay, the Brisa is talking about Bibrei with his son. So to Tani Brisa, you don't return it is Bibrei is the kid. Why do we not return it if it's the kid? Maybe your father wrote to this guy. If I'm not going to change his mind, and give it to him. And after your father, you yourself wrote it to another person. And you cannot back out. And that's the reason why, because why not? Because your father gave it to a different person, and therefore they're going to return it to him. Now you're going to try to collect for him. Do and you're going to end up splitting it with him. So when it comes to the son, we're not going to return it. And that's the reason. We're not going to return it. Why not? 4 lines into the white lines. Because maybe the father never ended up giving it. Father never ended up giving it. And and after the father was nifter, the child gave it to someone else. Rather, we tell the kid, if you're telling the truth, if you're saying your father really gave it to this guy, just go now and because then even if your father didn't give it because because the first document and a latter document, the first one's gonna win. So says Rav Zvi, that's what we tell the child. If it's the child, we're not going to return it. Because we have to be worried that maybe the father didn't really want to give it to him, but rather we tell the kid, you write up the document. And then there's no concern, because even if indeed your father did give it to someone else, the earlier document will prevail. We'll pick it up from Tanur Rabban in the next year. B'siyata Dishmaya.